As you set out for Ithaca, hope the voyage will be a long one, full of adventure, full of discovery. Less Dragonians and Cyclops. Angry Poseidon, don't be afraid of them. You will never find things like that on your way. As long as you keep your thoughts raised high, as long as rare excitement stirs your spirit and body. Less Dragonians and Cyclops, wild Poseidon, you won't encounter them unless you bring them along inside your soul, unless your soul sets them up in front of you. Cavafy. It has indeed been a long journey, full of adventure and discovery to reach this point, a bit longer than we had wished for 7 years ago when we set out from this very room. And we did meet our fair share of Cyclops, Dragonians and wild Poseidon on our way, whether we set them up ourselves or circumstances brought them. But finally, just before Christmas last year, we reached our harbour of Ithaca, and today, dear friends and colleagues, we are gathered here again to celebrate the launch of the 26th volume of the Modia series, the final result of the conference From Homer to Hatzi-Yavrouda, Aspects of Oral Narration in the Greek Tradition. It is a great pleasure for me to be back in Athens and here at the Danish Institute for this happy event. But let me start by taking you 7 years back and say a few words about the conference. Initially, it started as a collaboration between my dear colleague Marianthi Koplanoglu and from the Folklore Department of the University of Athens and myself, with the idea of organizing a conference on orality. But since we soon found out that we wanted it to have a diachronic aspect, we widened the working group to also include classicist Christos Zafiropoulos from the University of Patra, folklorist Georgios Katsadoros from the University of the Aegean, and neo-Hellenist Tina Lendari from the University of Athens. I would like to thank them all for their contribution in preparing the conference. 20 papers were presented at the conference spanning a chronological period from the Homeric poems to yesterday's gossip, and themes from Byzantine manuscripts to modern folk tales, to mention but a few. We owe a deep felt gratitude to all who participated in the conference and contributed to its success, not least to the 3 keynote speakers who honored us with their presence and enlightened us with their wisdom. Mina Skafte Jensen from the University of Southern Denmark, Michalis Miraklis from the Academy of Athens, and Carl Lindahl from the University of Houston. However, having an academic discussion on orality without including an actual oral performance didn't make much sense to us. And luckily, we were able to make such a performance come through via a happy collaboration with the British School at Athens. I recall with great joy the beautiful evening at the school where 2 British storytellers, Hugh Lupton and Daniel Morden, performed parts of the Odyssey to a fascinated audience. Let me take this opportunity to warmly thank the then director, John Bennett, for securing this event, and the school for their warm hospitality. Furthermore, we were able to conclude the conference with another presentation of popular culture, a Karagiozis play. I recall pictures of this room transferred into a shadow theatre and a very successful performance. Thanks to Marianne for organizing this and to Tassos Konstas for giving us this memorable finale. This is also the moment to thank the Danish Institute, its then director, Christina Winter Jacobsen, and its staff for hosting and supporting the conference. I think I speak for us all when I express my gratitude for the warm hospitality we met here. Thanks also go to the University of Athens for co-organizing the conference and for addressing its participants at the opening session. Finally, last but not least, we must extend our gratitude to the Carlsberg Foundation. First, for financially supporting the conference, and then the publication of its result. Concluding, I would like to turn to the publication and personally thank my co-editors for their hard work and for pressing on even at moments when Poseidon seemed too angry an opponent to me, and I had almost given up. Thank you, Christos, Georgios, Mariante. We also owed renewed thanks to the Danish Institute and its present director, Sanne Hoffmann, both for finding the last sum of money that made the publication possible and for taking initiative to this evening's event. My last thanks go to the two special guests tonight, to Georgios Tserpes, who has kindly accepted to present the volume, and to Georgia Haikali for treating us with a storytelling performance. For once again, we cannot just talk academically about orality. We must live it, as you say in Greek. And now it's time to pass the word to Georgios Tserpes. Georgios Tserpes holds 2 degrees from the University of Athens, from where he also received his PhD. His thesis was entitled "The Proverbial Discourse of Balkan Peoples, Themes, Uses, Interpretations, Communication, a Contribution to Comparative Folkloristics." Since then, he has kept on an interest in the area of proverbs, and he has published books and articles about this theme. From 2021, Georgios has been an associate researcher at the Hellenic Folklore Research Centre at the Academy of Athens, as you see there, in the field of folk narrative research. And we are extremely pleased that he has accepted our invitation to present the volume tonight. Welcome, Georgios. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here tonight. Thank you for the invitation. So, when the editors of the volume From Homer to Hatzi-Yavrouda, Aspects of Oral Narration in the Greek Tradition asked me to present it, I thought a lot about what the most appropriate way would be to do this. Many thoughts went through my mind. For example, to present the volume based on the contribution of its author and in the order in which each article is presented in the volume, or to follow a chronological approach, given that the volume covers a period that begins with the time of Homer and extends to the present day and modern forms of communication. However, none of these approaches satisfy me. As on the one hand, they are linear, and on the other hand, I do not think they would convey the real meaning of the volume, which in my opinion concerns how orality ultimately serves man to cope with a complex reality. On the other hand, I could not ignore my folkloric capacity, so I ended up presenting the volume within the context of a folklore perspective. Oral culture is not a relic of the past. It is a dynamic way of being, thinking, and acting. Through the discourse that is uttered in front of others, people do not simply describe the world. They interpret it, contest it, redefine it. In a volume that spans centuries and cultures, from Homer to Hurricane Katrina and Facebook Mandinades, we see how the forms and genres of orality function as mechanisms of meaning and resistance. Every oral act, every performance is not only aesthetic, it is also a cultural strategy of survival. So in this brief presentation, I will attempt to highlight how the volume, through its diverse contributions, invites us to rethink orality not simply as a technique or historical phenomenon, but as a human response to reality, to the need for communication, for community, for meaning. This is because orality is one of the fundamental dimensions of human expression. It is not simply a stage in the history of discourse before writing. It is the way in which people experience, remember, and interpret the world in contexts that are not limited to tradition, but extend to contemporary discourse, song, testimony, performance, and even digital communication. So, as a folklorist, I approach the collective volume from Homer to Hatzi-Yavrouda through two theoretical tools particularly important for our discipline, genre and performance. And I will attempt to show how through the various examples hosted in the volume, orality becomes for communities, but also for individuals, a way to deal with reality, loss, history, social injustice, everyday life, and even the desire for expression. However, in order for my approach to be understood, I would first like to refer to these two concepts and how they are utilized by folklore studies. In folkloristics, the concept of genre was mainly used as a method of classifying texts, and essentially this term came to replace the term type. Gradually, the attention of scholars regarding the concept of genre shifts to the meaning of the texts, considering individuals and putting emphasis on variation, given the fact that folklore is linked to groups, communities, networks, etc. This way, the concept of genre acquires a sociological dimension as well, since what is important is to specify the local, temporal, and causal conditions of use by identifying what a genre conventionally does, something that makes it recognizable. Roger Abrahams was a pioneer folklorist that included the study of folklore genres in the context of the theory of their performance, that is, an organized process starting from the level of the group and moving towards that of community and society. This way, he examines the performer, the utterance itself, and the effect it has on the audience, uniting this way form and function, and considering folklore as communication, with such a perspective is in line with the innovative definition for folklore given by Dan Benamos, defined as artistic communication in small groups. Folklore is now understood as a communication process, while the emphasis given to the fact that this communication is artistic also highlights its aesthetic dimension. This way emerges an ethnography of performance as a framework where many factors define performance, such as setting, act sequence, cultural themes, social interactional organizing principles, and of course, the performer and the audience. The concept of variation is also central to folklore theory. However, the variation now is not understood as such only from the side of the text, but also from the side of the context. While folklorists used to be interested in the variations of an ideal type of text, now the emphasis is on the variations of the context in which the texts are used. Context also is an interdisciplinary concept, while it works as an interpretant for folklore, as an agent of mediation for science and their objects. Specifically, the situational context is very important for folkloristics and was an inspiration to many researchers. But let's return to the volume. In this volume, there are several contributions that refer to the concept of genre, which highlight the conventions of each one, but which at the same time emerge from them themes that allow the speaker to place his experience within a context. Mina Skafte-Jensen, with her article Homer, the Storyteller, shows how the Homeric epics are organized around narratives within a narrative, highlighting narrative skill as a key characteristic of the epic hero. Jensen analyzes Nestor's lengthy narrative to Patroclus, emphasizing its complexity, rhetorical function, and strategic management of time. Nestor is presented as a model of the Homeric narrator. He adapts his narrative to the listener, incorporates moral lessons, and prepares for developments in the main plot. The author also draws on Parry and Lord's theories of composition in performance, noting that Homeric rhapsodists recompose the epics, each time based on the audience. She also incorporates Lauri Honko's studies of the Indian epic tradition, especially the concept of the mental text, an internal, stable form that can be rendered in a variety of ways. In conclusion, Jensen considers that the structure of the Homeric narrative is deeply influenced by the principles of oral poetry. The stories within the stories reveal the way in which the Homeric tradition functioned as a flexible and living narrative, while the comparison with contemporary oral traditions highlights the common mechanism of adaptation and reinterpretation that governs oral literature. The Homeric epics are also addressed in the article by Ioannis Konstantakos entitled Homeric Epic and Ionian Novella, which examines the deep relationship between Homeric epic poetry and the oral tradition of the folk novella. Initially, Konstantakos refers to the neglected dimension of Homeric orality, as traditional research has focused on the formulaic techniques of epic composition, ignoring the relationship with folk oral storytelling. He emphasizes that the Homeric epics draw from a living stock of oral folk narratives that circulated from mouth to mouth. The oral novella as a genre is defined as a narrative of a realistic nature with themes that touch on the urban, private, erotic element. It often appears in a judicial or family setting, while the typical hero is an intelligent character who advances thanks to his mind, a motif that finds correspondence in Odysseus and other Homeric heroes. The oral novel, with motifs such as the love trap, false accusation, rejection, functions as a cultural substrate of the epic myth. Reality is not absent from epic poetry. It is simply filtered through narrative types derived from folk oral culture. Narration, thus, becomes a means of controlling, interpreting, and sometimes overcoming everyday or social impasses. In the Homeric epics, the poet borrows ready-made narrative models from the oral repertoire of the novel and reconstructs them in an epic context. At the same time, significant analogies with Egyptian, Iranian, and other narratives are identified, while the presence of many variations of the same motifs within the epics indicates the oral origin of the stories, as well as their adaptability in each case of utterance. All of the above constitute an important contribution to the present volume, as Homer emerges as a receiver and transformer of folk narrative forms, while at the same time the folkloric dimension is introduced into the study of epic poetry. This use of oral material in the composition of the Homeric epics also brings to the fore the dialectical relationship between written and spoken language. Michalis Meraklis' article From Homer to Hatzi-Yavrouda and to Vondorini refers precisely to this fact, as it argues that we should not perceive orality and literacy as opposing poles. He believes that there is a complementary or dialectical relationship between them, since orality does not disappear with the advent of writing, but the two coexist, interact, and evolve. In fact, he himself gives examples of the fusion of oral and written language using the example of Bellerophon in the Iliad, which is analyzed as a micro-episode where writing and orality meet. Beyond the Homeric epics, however, Meraklis also refers to the case of the folk poetess Vondorini, Irini Markou, who, without access to systematic education, creates a poetic work of 4,672 verses inspired by nature, experiential wisdom, and oral reflection. Michalis Meraklis transfers the analysis to the field of folk culture, presenting orality as a form of experiential wisdom. Through the example of Irini Markou, known as Vondorini, a rural poetess from Apyranthos in the island of Naxos, he shows how orality becomes a tool of philosophical reflection without philosophical terminology. Markou observes nature and society and transforms her experience into poetic discourse without institutional training. Her verses do not simply capture the world, they interpret, judge, and transform it. The poet's own memory, which recites long works from memory, becomes the bearer of an embodied oral tradition. Here, orality is a way of thinking and survival, a means of moral and psychological balance. What is worth emphasizing in the case of Vondorini is that her creation is not based on a fixed text, but on internal variation and transformation of experience into poetry. As in traditional storytellers or rhapsodists, variation is not a defect, but a structural feature of folk creation. In particular, Markou recalls Lauri Honko's theory of the mental text, a mental model which is embodied differently in its performance. This in turn leads us to another dialectical relationship that exists in folklore, that between individuality and collectivity. Stamatis Zochios, in his article Legend as Fact in Greek and Eastern European Traditions, Reality Factors and the Example of Visions, approaches orality within the context of the truth-claiming narrative. In particular, he studies the oral genre of tradition, that is legend, focusing on its relationship with the concept of faith and collective truth. He analyzes the functions of traditions as narratives that do not simply preserve but claim the authority of truth, transforming personal experiences or testimonies into culturally acceptable interpretations of the world. Orality here is not only based on memory, but also has an evidentiary structure. Legends rely on techniques of persuasion, such as the rhetoric of experience, naming things, the sense of being there, and are closely linked to beliefs that are enacted in its narrative. Visionary narratives function as bridges between the individual and the community, offering explanation, belief, and meaning. The article suggests that oral narratives of this type do not simply belong to the tale or mythological imagination, but to the very rhetoric of truth with which communities constitute themselves in the face of the inexplicable. This intersection between collectivity and individuality is perhaps most clearly seen in Marianthi Kaplanoglou's article To Give or Not to Give, addressing community and poverty through oral narration in a Greek island village, which constitutes a deeply narratological approach to orality, focusing on the Greek variant of the fairy tale type Arne Thompson Utter 545a. Kaplanoglou's analysis is extremely useful for the study of orality, the concept of genre, and the theory of performance as developed in contemporary folklore studies. The article argues that oral storytelling is not simply a reproduction of traditional material, but a dynamic act of meaning-making within specific social contexts. It incorporates the theory of variation as an organic function of oral storytelling and is based on the logic of negotiation between fixed patterns and creative transformation. Narration is not limited to texts, but extends to oral and embodied memory, social relations, and community values. Particular importance is attributed to the fact that the storyteller Stamatia, who preserved and reproduced an old story, did so within a family, local, female context. Thus, Kaplanoglou insists on the dual character of the genre, imaginary, with motifs of reward and magic, and realistic, with social roles such as worker, beggar, daughter. Therefore, oral storytelling is not treated as a thing of the past, but as an active cultural practice, as orality and tales continue to function as mechanisms for interpreting contemporary life through memory, imagination, and action. Performance theory now reminds us that orality is never abstract. It is embodied, social, affective. Discourse delivered in front of others has an intention, a purpose, an effect, and in this field the volume hosts some very important contributions. Initially, Birgit Olsen's article entitled Hatzi-Yavrouda of Kos and the Craft of Storytelling is a tribute to an oral storyteller, Hatzi-Yavrouda, and offers an exceptionally rich example of the combination of orality theory, folkloristic theory of genre, and performance theory. Olsen studies the narrative characteristics of Hatzi-Yavrouda as a storyteller, that is, as a specialized, creative bearer of oral tradition. She emphasizes that she is a narrative virtuoso, not simply a transmitter of traditions, as she elaborates complex narratives combining myths, fairy tale motifs, Byzantine and Western literary influences, while incorporating elements from oral poetry, Christian tradition, and local reality, without losing the coherence of the narrative. Olsen indicates that Hatzi-Yavrouda is not limited to a fairy tale genre, but combines and reshapes a variety of narrative forms and genres, which she functionally unifies, something that reflects the folkloric view of genres as dynamic, intertwined, and performative. Although we do not have a record of the actual performance, Olsen documents through the texts themselves that the narrative act is dramatized with strong stage elements, dialogues, changes of style, forms of drama. The use of repetition patterns, dramatic intensities, laments, and everyday language shows narratives designed for oral performance, while the narrator's stories are adapted to female experiences, giving a social voice to her heroines. Hatzi-Yavrouda, therefore, does not simply narrate, but creates. She intervenes, shapes, and educates through speech. Her tradition is alive, dynamic, and deeply personal. This personal dimension that narrative practice can take is also highlighted in Carl Lindahl's article in this volume entitled Performance in the Time of Disaster, Testimonies, Resistance, and Vernacular Memorials in Hurricane Katrina. Carl Lindahl examines the oral testimonies of survivors of Hurricane Katrina, approaching them as material and performative forms of cultural memory. These narratives function as folk historiography, and at the same time as tools of resistance against official forgetting or distortion of events. Orality theory is applied through the dynamics of personal experience and spoken language as a means of truth and moral reading of reality. Testimonies are not limited to a strict genre, but are part of a spectrum of vernacular memorials, from song to graffiti and public narrative. The performance of testimony takes on particular significance. The very narration of trauma becomes an act of survival and community building. Storytellers share experiences of loss, pain, and solidarity in settings such as churches, schools, squares, and social media, creating informal networks of memory and documentation. The article significantly expands the scope of folklore theory on orality as it highlights testimony as a moral, political, and performative act. Lindahl shows that in times of crisis, oral culture becomes a tool for survival, meaning-making, and the maintenance of collective dignity. But beyond personal discourse, there is also public discourse. Discourse that is articulated in environments of intense social control. There, orality and performance as social acts may take on other dimensions, and in the present volume there are some very interesting contributions that touch on this issue. Χρήστος Ζαφυρόπουλος article «Εκταυτής η δι της εξετάσεως πολλέ απέχθη εμή γεγόναση, Plato's Socrates and Performing Philosophy in the Oral Culture of Athens» focuses on how public discourse in the agora of ancient Athens constitute a process of rhetorical performance. Zafyropoulos views 5th century BC Athens as an oral community, arguing that philosophy as a practice in Socrates' time was practiced primarily orally, through lively dialogues with physical presence, gazes, gestures, and emotional interaction. These elements are not merely decorative. They are elements of lively philosophical performance in a context of orality. Another point on which his approach focuses is that of the public image in oral societies, as social survival depends on public reputation and face. Socratic irony, the deconstruction of interlocutors, the shame of embarrassment in front of the audience, are not simply philosophical means. They are dangerous public events that may provoke disapproval and hatred. This was also the case with Socrates. His public presence, and in particular his apology, is not simply a speech of defense, but a dramatic representative act against the gaze and judgment of the many. Zafyropoulos uses the term performance of philosophy, showing that philosophical engagement is not an abstract intellectual act, but a socially embodied one. The trial and condemnation of Socrates, therefore, constitute a failure of philosophy to survive in the public theatrical space of the city. And this is why Plato ultimately turns to the isolated school and writing. And all this because philosophy emerges as a form of living narrative which not only interprets but also clashes with the dominant reality. Sofia Papaioanou's approach is similar in her article entitled Oral Narrations and Roman Imperial History, which examines in depth the function of orality within the context of Roman imperial ideology, focusing on the episode of Vespasian's miraculous cures in Alexandria in 69 AD. The author begins by noting that even official Roman historiography draws material from oral sources, as is evident from the works of Tacitus and Suetonius, who offer variations on the same episode. The story of Vespasian's miraculous healing is interpreted as a construction aimed at political legitimization based on already existing religious and cultural oral traditions. In particular, Tiberius Julius Alexander, governor of Egypt, is said to have drawn on religious narratives and oral miracles of Tserpes and Asclepius to frame Vespasian as a new god healer. The article is particularly linked to the theory of performance as it treats the miracle as a public performance. Vespasian's miracle takes place publicly, in front of a crowd, and its success depends on the reaction of the spectators. Vespasian is presented as a theatrical bearer of a religious political role, while the physical act, for example, spitting in the eyes of the blind to cure him, constitutes a key point of the performance. Thus, Papaioannou finds an analogy with the popular performances of miracle workers and aretalogi. In conclusion, Vespasian embodies a religious role before the crowd in a scene that combines politics, the body, and faith. Orality functions here not as a means of dissemination, but as a mechanism for establishing power through performance. The above approaches focus, as we have seen, on orality in the public sphere. White's contribution to the present volume, entitled Post-Classical Orality, Thoughts on the Dramatic Scholia as sorry for the accent, Recibuk, is analogous and examines theatre as a site of moral and political negotiation. White proposes the term orality as an intermediary between orality and literature to describe the experiential oral function of scholia in ancient and Byzantine manuscripts of drama. Thus, grammatica scholia are treated as Regibuch, that is, as directorial instruction books for the oral performance of texts. Consequently, the performer student functions as a performer who conveys poetry live to the audience. White focuses particularly on the theatrical monologue, but also on the polyphony inherent in dramatic discourse. The hero utters not an authentic inner voice, but incorporates the words of others, imitates, ironizes, comments. Thus, the theatre functions as a performative environment of dialogue between the private and the collective, between the personal and the political. Orality, then, is understood not as a spontaneous expression, but as a performative act with social weight. The voice, and not just the text, becomes the vehicle of moral stance, political mood, interpretation of the world. White's contribution is particularly useful for thinking about how orality does not belong only to tradition or informal forms, but also penetrates more scholarly or stage practices, functioning as a channel of cultural transfer and social participation. This relationship of orality with scholarly forms of expression is also of concern to Nicolette Trachoulia in this volume, who in her article Looking for Traces of Orality in Some Byzantine Illustrated Manuscripts explores the relationship between image and oral speech through examples of Byzantine and post-Byzantine art, focusing mainly on the depiction of narrative scenes from the life of Jesus and other sacred figures. The main question that arises is, can the image function as a vehicle of orality? The answer proposed by the author is positive, arguing that many of the scenes depicted in icons and frescoes draw their narrative material from oral or performative contexts, such as hymns, liturgical dramas, oral narratives of the faithful, and popular readings of sacred texts. In this way, Trachoulia invites us to think about orality not only orally, but also visually and materially. The image can speak, recall oral genres, and perform the narrative before the viewer's eyes. Thus, it introduces a sensory dimension of orality, based on the theory of multimodal performance, performance not only through voice, but through space, vision, objecthood, and presents virtual representations as texts that do not passively render the narrative, but participate in its interpretation, performing it publicly or in worship. In conclusion, Trachoulia's study expands the concept of orality beyond sound, proposing an audiovisual and performative type of narrative, where the image functions as an active vehicle of memory, speech, and action. Its contribution is essential for the connection of orality, performance, and material culture. Most of the previous approaches examined orality in societies that were de facto more oral than ours. What is happening today? What is the role of orality in the modern era, and what needs does it satisfy? The article by Manolis Varvounis and Giorgos Kouzas, entitled Orality in Contemporary Society, analyzing the structure of social comments, gossip, in a modern Greek community, constitutes an important contribution to the analysis of orality through the structure of gossip. In particular, gossip is presented as a structured form of oral communication and not as trivial or unregulated discourse. The authors analyze gossip as a folklore genre, embedded in a spectrum that includes legends, rumors, and urban myths. They identify specific narrative structures and strategies aimed at social intervention, information management, and social control. Narrative carries performative characteristics such as plot development, emotional involvement, and validation of the narrator as a social judge. Gossip, thus, emerges as an overlooked but powerful vehicle of modern morality, shaping perceptions, behaviors, and power relations within the community. However, the dimension of the digital performance of orality could not be ignored in our time. The article by Katsadoros and Kafetsidaki, entitled The Mandinades, Couplets of Karpathos Island on the Internet, Local Students' Views, studies the functioning of the Mandinades of Karpathos in the modern digital environment through the eyes of the young people of the island themselves. Through questionnaires to students, the reception and use of this traditional oral genre on the Internet is captured. The theoretical approach is based on the concept of secondary orality, with Mandinades operating in a hybrid field between oral and digital discourse. At the same time, they are treated as a folklore genre with specific themes such as love and everyday life, but also as a means of expression and social participation. The performative dimension is transferred from the community to the digital environment. Posting, commenting, participating constitute a new type of audience and community. Students recognize the role of the Internet in the rescue, but also in the transformation of tradition, bringing to the fore the need to redefine the concepts of authenticity and performance. To conclude, in the volume From Homer to Hatzi-Yavrouda, orality is presented not only as a technique or medium, but as an alternative way of viewing and interpreting reality. Whether through the martial word of Homer, or through the wisdom of folk authors, or on the border between myth and novel, or in the square of ancient Athens, or in the public ritual of an imperial city, or in the images and readings of the Byzantine tradition, or in the vocal space of pedagogy in theatre, or in the voices of women in folk tradition, or in the socially conscious narrative of poverty and morality, or in oral memory that transforms faith into narrative, or in the everyday language of social commentary, or in the Internet where oral forms are recycled in new terms, or finally in oral memory in times of disaster and crisis, oral culture does not simply record life, it transforms it. Genres in their oral forms are not rigid templates, but adaptive repertoires. Performance is not decorative, but constitutive of meaning. And above all, orality offers a path through which individuals and communities can interpret suffering, preserve memory, express resistance, and affirm identity. In any case, orality offers a resistance to abstract theory and cold rationality. It places memory, imagination, and moral judgment at the center of human experience. It is ultimately a lived way of making sense of the world. As a folklorist, I find in this volume not just a scholarly exploration of texts, but a profound recognition of the human voice in its grief, joy, protest, and resilience. Thank you very much. Maybe the editors would like to say a few words or comment on something?
Okay, a few live thanks. First of all, thank you, Georgios. If there is a re-edition of the volume, your paper should be the introduction, and not ours. Thank you, Birgit, for thanking everyone we should have thanked. A Danish could only do that. Thanks to the director of the Institute for many things. A first comment. This started as a conference, okay? And thanks to the Danish Institute, what we experienced in the conference was what the host of an ancient symposium would love his guests to experience. We had a great time. We became philoi, most of us, and that was thanks to you. But that's not all. After the conference, as Birgit said, it took us many years to publish the volume, and the Danish Institute once again played a major, if not the major role, alongside Carlsberg. I don't drink beer, I drink raki, but anyway, alongside Carlsberg Foundation. So, we thank you so much. And a final comment, back to stereotypes of people, of nations, whatever, we prefer to speak of people. Danish, for us Greeks, are famous for saying little and doing things. Okay, that's our view of the Danish. I guess Greeks in Denmark might reproduce a stereotype that we say a lot and do little. Now, during these 7 years, starting from the conference and ending to the book, I think we found a middle way. And this is so important for us, and also for you present, and all those who are kind enough to watch it on the internet. I think it will be uploaded. Please remember, it's not authors, it's people who spoke, people who discussed, that brought this volume to life. So feel free anytime to contact us and sit down and exchange our stories, our narratives. That's all from me. Thank you so much.
Dear friends, I will start with Birgit. Birgit, thank you so much for taking us along to this journey. You had the inspiring ideas for beginning the conference and arriving now at this volume. Thank you so much. I'm really so honored to be part of this team, this work team, working with you, with Christos, George, and Tina at the beginning. Thank you so much also for helping us, our institutions, the Danish Institute, the director back then and you now. Thank you so much. All your scientific staff. And thank you also to our University of Athens for helping us with organizing the conference, and the dean at the time, Professor Karamalenko, the head of the department back then, Professor Papathomas, and the head of the faculty, Professor Kalamakis. I would also like to thank a person who is far, far away from here. I would like to thank Batseva Ben Amos, who so generously agreed to dedicate this volume to the loving memory of the leading folklorist of our times, Dan Ben Amos. And instead of giving a brief presentation of the work of Dan Ben Amos, which is really so difficult to do, you can read many of his papers. There is one of his papers published in a Greek book. We edited with George, Christos, and other colleagues about the folk tale in the editions of Gutenberg. You can read one of his papers there. But instead of presenting his work or say a few words about his life, I would like to share with you something that Dan had said to me a few years ago when he sent to me via email, before it is published, the frontispiece of one of his latest book entitled Folklore Concepts. So he sent me the frontispiece that it was all blue. And I asked him, Dan, why this is all blue? And he said to me, I am from the Mediterranean. My heart belongs to the Mediterranean, and I always hope and wish that the Mediterranean Sea would be a sea of peace, of friendship and communication. And these words, I think, are so important at these critical times. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay, hello everyone. First of all, I would like to thank my co-editors, Christos, Marianthi and Birgit, of course, as well as all the contributors whose work has made this volume possible. We're also especially grateful to the Danish Institute, which hosted and supported us in so many ways, from the very beginning, and to the Carlsberg Institute, of course, Foundation for generously sponsoring our publication, and of course to Aarhus University Press for the meticulous care in producing such a nice volume. Now, tonight, apart from everything else, we don't want to repeat what the others already said, we also have the joy of listening to Georgia Haikali, a storyteller whose background, I would say, bridges scholarship and performance. Georgia holds a master's degree in folklore, and I first met her while supervising her outstanding thesis on the significance of water for the community of Stagiates in Pilion. She's also a graduate of the Archi Drama School. She has been involved in storytelling since 2003, performing in theatres, festivals, schools and open spaces across Greece. She's also a long-standing collaborator of the Syros International Storytelling Festival. It is therefore a particular honor and joy for me to invite her to share with us her art, the living voice that connects research, memory and the timeless human need for story. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. It's a joy for me to be here because when this conference happened, I just had my baby and I couldn't come to see it, and I was very devastated. And when Daniel Morden came, I was crying because I couldn't come here. So it's an honor for me to be here now to this closure of that conference. And thank you for inviting me. I'd like you to allow me to start the story with my favorite Greek words, not English. Κόκκινη κλωστή δεμένη, στην ανέμη τυλιγμένη, δώσ' της κλώτσο να γυρίσει, παραμύθι να αρχινήσει. Αρχή των παραμυθιών. Καλησπέρα της αφεντιάς σας. Once upon a time, there was a man who lived with his wife, and the two of them loved each other dearly, and they were very happy. Their joy became even greater when they had their child, a girl whom they named Yavrouda. Yavrouda was so beautiful, like the silver moon. And when she was old enough, they sent her as a pupil to a renowned embroideress in the land. And this embroideress was so good, such an elegant, and she was very skilled. And that's why she had so many pupils. Everything she was made, it was a piece of art. But this embroideress was also a bad person. And that's why no man wanted to marry her. But neither did she want to marry anyone. So it seemed that she was going to be unmarried. Until one day, the thought came to her to wed Yavrouda's father, who, as I said, already had a wife, but the embroideress didn't care. She was cunning and stubborn, and she could do anything she set her mind to. So she decided to do everything in order to marry him. One day, as Yavrouda was embroidering, the embroideress went close to her and said, "Oh, my sweet Yavrouda, all this time you've been coming here, you never brought me some walnuts to taste." And Yavrouda, when she went home, she said to her mother, "Mother, won't you give me some walnuts to take them to my teacher and please her so she can learn me the finest stitches?" And the mother said to the daughter, "My daughter, you know that I can't give you walnuts because the chest is made of marble and the lid is too heavy for us to lift it." But Yavrouda pleaded and pleaded until she persuaded her mother. And they went to the chest. The mother lifted the lid and let the girl to hold it. But the lid was too heavy. And as the mother leaned into the chest to get the walnuts, the lid slipped from the girl's hands and fell upon the mother and crushed her. Yavrouda cried for her mother, and the father cried for his wife, but the embroideress was secretly happy, for her plan had succeeded, and she was closer to achieving her goal. So, some other day, as she was sewing some stitches to Yavrouda, she said to her, "Oh, my sweet child, how sorry I am. I was the cause of you losing your father. How I wish I could take some of your sorrow away. Wouldn't it be great if I became your mother? I would treat you with the sweet treats every day and shower you with love, kisses and hugs." "Oh, my teacher, that would be wonderful, but how can this happen?" "It can happen if I marry your father. And will he want to marry you? Will he want to marry you?" "Oh, my child, if you want to, he will too. If you tell him that I love you and I care about you for your own good, he will do it. And will you, my teacher, treat me as my mother?" "Oh, my child, as your mother, and better still." So many things the woman whispered into the child's ears that by the time the father came home that night, Yavrouda spoke to him and convinced him. So the embroideress married Yavrouda's father, but from the very first days, Yavrouda realized that the stepmother would never be for her like her mother had been, because the embroideress hated and mistreated her all the day long, and Yavrouda would weep in secret, speaking to her own mother, asking for her forgiveness, for even though she had not meant to, she was the reason of her death. And as years passed, Yavrouda grew into a wonderful, a beautiful woman, and the embroideress grew ever jealous, seeking for a way to get rid of her. And she found it. Yes. At that moment, the queen of the land was in labor, but the child was not human. It was a serpent. And its midwife who came to help her, it was bitten by the snake and died. So the king sent messengers throughout the kingdom saying that any woman who would help the queen to deliver her child, she would be richly rewarded by the king. The stepmother heard it and thought that was the chance she was looking for. So she went to the palace and told the king that she had a daughter who is most suitable to deliver the queen. But the king must send his men to fetch her, for she will not come of her own will. So the king sent his men, and they brought Yavrouda before him. And no matter how the child, the girl, was pleading, saying that she was not capable as a midwife, the king would not relent. Yavrouda, seeing that she could not persuade him, she begged for an hour's time and went straight to her mother's grave. And there she wept and cried, saying, "O mother, my bitter mother, help me, for I do not know what to do." And from within the grave, a voice came, "O daughter, my bitter daughter, I hear your troubles. Do not weep and do not despair. Do exactly as I tell you, and everything will turn out well." Yavrouda listened carefully to her mother's words, and then she went to the palace and asked the king for a pair of iron gloves. When they were brought to her, she put them on and delivered the child without being beaten. The king was happy because his wife was safe and his child was born, and he rewarded Yavrouda with rich gifts and lots of money and sent her home in peace. All in the kingdom praised Yavrouda, the midwife. All, but the stepmother, who nearly burst with anger. But the serpent child had to be fed, and each nurse who would come to nurse it, each woman who would come to nurse it, she was bitten by the snake and died. So soon the king could find no woman willing to feed the child. Once again, he sent his messengers throughout the kingdom, saying that any woman who would manage to feed the child, she would be richly rewarded by the king. The stepmother heard it. She thought that was the chance. She went to the palace and told the king, "The one who delivered him is the one suitable to nurse him, but you must send your men to fetch her, for she will not come of her own will." So the king once more, he sent his men, and they brought Yavrouda before him, no matter how she pleaded, saying that she cannot nurse the child. The king would not relent. So she begged for an hour time, and when she got it, she went straight to her mother's grave, and there she cried and wept, saying, "O mother, my bitter mother, help me, for I do not know what to do." And from within the grave, that voice came again, "O daughter, my bitter daughter, I hear your troubles. Do not cry and do not despair. Do exactly as I tell you, and everything will turn out well." Yavrouda listened to her father's words and went straight to the palace and asked the king for a pair of iron breasts. And when they were brought to her, she poured milk inside, she held the child into her arms and nursed it. At last, the child was satisfied, and the king was happy. Once the serpent child could be fed by its own, the king rewarded Yavrouda with rich gifts and lots of money, and sent her home in peace. And everyone in the kingdom praised Yavrouda, the nurse, for the skills and the beauty. Everyone, but whom? The stepmother, who nearly burst with anger. Time passed, and the moment came for the prince to marry. Yet, whichever bride spent the night with him, she would be found dead the next morning. So the king sent his messengers throughout the kingdom, seeking for a girl to marry the prince. And the stepmother thought that this was the chance. She ran to the palace and told the king, the one who delivered him, the one who nursed him, is the only person worthy to marry him. And the king sent his men. They brought Yavrouda before him, And when she heard what he wanted, she begged for an hour's time. When she got it, she went straight to her mother's grave, and there she cried and wept, saying, "O mother, my bitter mother, help me, for I do not know what to do." And there, from within the grave, that voice came again, "O daughter, my bitter daughter, I hear your troubles. Do not cry and do not despair. Do exactly as I tell you, and everything will turn out well." Yavrouda listened carefully to her mother's words. She went to the palace and married the prince. But this was not a wedding. It looked more like a funeral. Everyone was thinking, isn't it a pity, such a beauty to be bitten by the snake? When the two were left alone, Yavrouda asked the serpent to remove his garment so she will take off her dress. And the snake did that. And Yavrouda took off her dress. But, guided by her mother, she was wearing several more dresses underneath, so she asked the serpent to remove another garment, and another, until 7 serpent garments and 7 dresses were taken away. And once the serpent had cast off all his garments, he revealed a youth, handsome like the sun. Yavrouda took the garments, threw them into the fireplace, and burned them. And the prince told to her, "Now you set me free, and from now on I will always be yours." And then they became husband and wife. The next morning, the king and queen entered into their son's chamber, fearful because they thought that they were going to find Yavrouda dead beside the snake. And instead, they saw her naked, sleeping, embracing a handsome young man. When they heard what had happened, they held a wedding feast that lasted 3 days and 3 nights. And everyone in the kingdom praised Yavrouda, the woman who turned the serpent into a human. Everyone but the stepmother, who nearly burst with envy. Time passed, and Yavrouda came to bear a child. And at that time, there broke a war with another neighboring kingdom, and the prince had to go to war. But before he leaves, he embraced his wife, kissed her goodbye, and went to his parents and asked them to take care of her as if she were the apple of their eye. And they told him not to worry, because they loved her threefold. She was their daughter-in-law, she was the mother of their unborn grandchild, and she also was the woman who turned him from a serpent to a human. Satisfied, the prince left. He went to war. But the stepmother's hatred had not failed. She was still seeking for a way to harm her. And she found it. She wrote a letter to the prince, pretending it was from the queen. And in that, she was accusing Yavrouda for several things. And she was writing that Yavrouda had changed, that she mistreated her parents, and so forth. And the prince answered to this letter, asking from his mother to be patient. And maybe it was the pregnancy, or she was missing her husband. But the stepmother changed this letter as well, and sent another one to the king and queen, in which the prince was ordering them to send Yavrouda away from the palace. They were puzzled, but did nothing, and said nothing to Yavrouda. The stepmother sent another letter to the prince, accusing Yavrouda, and he answered again, They asked him from his parents to have patience, but the stepmother changed again the letter, and he ordered again his parents to expel Yavrouda from the palace. And the king and queen were puzzled, but did nothing, and said nothing to Yavrouda. At last, the stepmother sent another letter to the king and queen, in which the prince was saying that if he found Yavrouda when he comes back from the war, he will cut her and her child in pieces with his sword. The king and queen now were forced to show this letter to Yavrouda. She could not understand, but what else could she do? She left the palace, and she walked and walked for many hours until night fell, and she went into a cave, and there, into the darkness, she sat down and started to lament, speaking of her life, her misfortune, and her orphanhood. And her lament was so powerful that the trees withered, the rocks cracked, and even the cave split in two, and from the cleft there came a deep, deep sigh. Ah! And Yavrouda turned towards the noise, the sound, and she saw a light spreading into the cave. And it seemed to her like a covering of a tomb was opening, and a youth was coming out of it. Who are you? And what are you doing in these places? The stranger asked. Yavrouda felt no fear. She told him her whole story, and he was deeply moved. Do not worry, he said, for now you have been saved. I only wish I might someday be saved too. Because I am a king. My name is Neros. I was brave. I did a lot of heroic deeds, but I also was injustice. I mistreated lots of people, and mostly women. Lots of them suffered into my hands, because every woman who slept with me, the next morning, I wanted her to be dead. Until one night, passing by a river, I saw a band of wonderful women dancing hand in hand. I went straight towards them, and as I was used to, I grabbed one of them and tried to force her to dance with me. And then all the other women fell upon me and started to kiss me, some in the lips, some in the cheeks, some in the head, others elsewhere, until when everybody had kissed me, I had no powers left, not even to stand. I fell into the waters of the river, and I don't remember what happened afterwards. Until the following night, I found myself into a cemetery, on an open grave with an empty coffin. And these women were next to me. They caught me and they brought me into this cave and forced me to dance with them. And just before the dawn, they told me that I was dead. And from then on, this cave was going to be my grave. And since then, every night, at midnight, they come and they force me to dance with them. And if I'm not here to meet them, they can find me wherever I am, and they bring me here to dance. When Neros finished his story, Yavrouda looked frightened. Do not be afraid, he said. We have plenty of time till midnight. Follow me, and I will take you to my palace. There you will knock the door, and you will ask for a place to stay, for the mercy of Master Nero's soul. Yavrouda followed the man, and when they reached his palace, she knocked the door. When a voice asked her who it was and what he wanted into these places, Yavrouda said, I am a pregnant woman. I have nowhere to go, and my time is near. Please give me a small room to spend the night. for the mercy of Master Nero's soul." These words were overheard by the queen, who was standing by her next to her window, and she herself opened the door and ordered a room to be given to the girl, and a midwife to come, because her time was near. And, indeed, by the morning, Yavrouda had delivered her child. When the queen came to see her, she asked her if she could give to the child the name of her son. And Yavrouda, she said yes, because she wanted to thank her for the hospitality. That night, Neros came to see Yavrouda, and when he saw the child, he rejoiced as if it was his own. He stayed with Yavrouda till late, and when it was time to leave, he said, "Tomorrow, when you put your child to sleep, you will say that lullaby. God in secret, born in secret, has my little one, child of Prince Neros, has my much loved one." "How can I say these words?" asked Yavrouda, "since the child is not yours?" Who I tell you this, know what I'm saying. I'm trying to help you, and you are trying to help me. Do as I tell you, and everything will turn out well. The next morning, Yavrouda, when she put her child to sleep, she was holding it to her arms, and she said the lullaby that Neros told her to. God in secret, born in secret, has my little one. Child of Master Neros, has my much loved one. At that moment, the queen came to see her. She heard the lullaby and she stood by the door to listen. And when she realized that the words that she was saying, she opened the door furiously and she said, "Why are you saying these words? How can this be the child of my son, since he's been dead for 2 years now? I have hosted you, I cared about you, and you insult the memory of my child like this." Yavrouda did not say anything. She could only weep. That night, when Neros came, he asked her if she said the lullaby, and she said that she did, but she was embarrassed because the queen had scolded her. "Tomorrow, you will sing it again." "But how can I do it? The queen will throw me out of the palace, and rightly so." "You must do it, and do not be afraid." So, the next morning, Yavrouda, when she put her child to sleep, she sang the same lullaby. And at that moment, the queen came and heard what she was saying. She entered furious into the chamber of Yavrouda and said, "How dare you, lulling your child like this? He can't be my son's child. He's been dead for 2 years now. If I hear it again, you will be out of the palace immediately." And Yavrouda didn't know what to say. She could only weep. But the queen, when she left from Yavrouda's room, she went to the maid that was taking care of Yavrouda and her child, and she ordered her not to leave the girl out of her sight even for a moment. She was to secret watch for her day and night. She even sent her another maid to help her. When the sun set and the darkness came, Neros entered into Yavrouda's room, sat by her side, and asked her if she said the lullaby. And Yavrouda answered that she did, but she was embarrassed because the queen had scolded her and threatened to send her out of the palace. "Tomorrow, you will sing it again," he said. "And if the queen gets very angry, tell her the truth and ask her to wait for me so she can see me with her own eyes. But tell her not to come close to me, or else I will disappear." The maids listened and heard everything, and when Eros left, they ran straight to the queen and told her the whole story. And the queen went to Yavrouda, where Yavrouda told to the queen how Eros found her and brought her to the palace, and how he is coming and see her every night. "Stay with me tonight and you will see him with your own eyes," she said, "but you must not come close to him because he will disappear from our eyes." So, the next night, Yavrouda the queen, stayed to see her son with her own eyes. And when she heard him, she ran towards him, trying to embrace him, because the poor mother could not help herself. But when she went towards him, he vanished from their eyes. The next night, Neros ordered Yavrouda to say to the queen to wrap a single piece of cloth around the palace 3 times. In each crack of the cloth, they were to paint a red cross on the outside and a green cross on the inside. Only one crack has to be left unsealed, and from that, the Neros will enter into the palace, and when he does, they have to seal it as well. And no matter what happened, no matter what they hear, they were not to be afraid. So Yavrouda the next morning told the queen what Neros ordered, and that same day the cloth it was ready, and they wrapped the palace with it. They sealed every cloth, they left every crack, they left only one, and from that crack the Neros passed into the palace and they sealed the crack as well, and waited. In midnight there was a noise, like a great commotion, from inside and outside the palace. From inside it sounded like someone was begging furious from one wall to another. It was Neros, who now was invisible and wanted to go out of the palace, for the fairies were calling him. And outside, wigs flapped and screams echoed and knockings were sounded like someone was trying to get into the palace. And when the dawn came, there was a great noise like earthquake, and then silence. Neros fell into the floor and stayed there, slept for many hours. When he woke up, he told to Yavrouda, "Now I'm alive again. I only have to remain into the palace for 40 days, and after this, if you wish, you can marry me." And when the 40 days passed, Yavrouda married the Neros, and she became a queen. But what about her first husband? The first husband. When the war finished, he went straight to the palace because he wanted to see his son, his wife, and his child. And when he came there, his father, the king and queen, told him that they sent her away in order to save her from his hands. And they scolded him for forcing them to treat in such a way to the very woman who saved him and turned him from a serpent into a human. And he couldn't understand what they were saying. So his parents showed him the letters. But these letters were not his. So they realized what had happened. And they tried to find out who was behind of it all, and he realized it was the stepmother. They arrested and put her into jail to rot. Ophis, that is the name of our prince, sent his men to the four edges of the earth to search for his wife. And after some time, one of them returned and told him that Yavrouda was a queen alongside King Neros, and that they had a child together. Ophis realized that this was his child, the one he had with Yavrouda. He took his army, he gathered his forces, and went to the kingdom of Neros. And when Neros heard that an army was marching against him, he gathered his forces and waited behind the city walls. And when Ophis came, Neros asked him who he was and what he wanted. And Ophis told him, "I'm the Prince Ophis, and I came here to take my wife back." "Your wife," said Neros, "belongs to me, and I belong to her because I saved her and she saved me from the fairies." "Yes, but Yavrouda also saved me," said Ophis, "because she delivered me when no woman could. She nursed me and she turned me from a serpent into a human." And seeing that no one would back down, they decided to start a war. But at that moment, an old man appeared and asked them why the blood of so many young men would be spilled. And Neros and Ophis told their stories. Neros said how Yavrouda saved him from the fairies, and Ophis how she delivered him, nursed him, and turned him into a human. And the old man listened to them. And then he thought carefully for a long time and said, "Instead of going to a war, let Yavrouda decide. Take her to the foot of a mountain. You, Neros, will hold the child in your arms, and you, Ophis, will carry a jug of water and begin to climb up to the mountain, the three of you. If Yavrouda first asks for the child, she will remain with Neros. If she asks for water, she will go with her first husband." And they did what the old man said. They took Yavrouda, they went to the foot of a mountain, they put her between them and started to climb up to the mountain. And at some point, just before the top of the mountain, Yavrouda wished to get rest. She sat on a rock, and there she asked for water because she was thirsty. Ophis gave her water and won. The woman fell upon his arms, and they went to the palace where the king gave him the crown, and now Ophis was a king, and Yavrouda was a queen. But what about the stepmother? We don't forget her. The stepmother, Yavrouda, when she was asked what she wished for her punishment, she said that she wanted her to be alive and see that all the evil she did, it was for nothing. But the stepmother could not bear her jealousy and died. So the three of them, Ophis, Yavrouda, and the child, lived happily ever after. But I was not there, and you should not believe me.